I had failed 211 candidates in 19 years on the Blackwall, and I never lost a minute of sleep over a single one of them. The mountain does the failing. I only sign the paper. A man comes to the hardest winter leaders course in the inventory believing the cold is something you can outwant, and the cold teaches him otherwise, and I write down what the mountain already decided. There is no cruelty in it. There is only the truth, arriving on schedule and my signature underneath it. So when the course director slid the roster across his desk and tapped one line with a blunt finger and said, "This one washes out before the final problem," quietly, I don't want a scene, I figured it was the easiest paper I'd ever sign. The name on the line was Ray's. "She's the old man's," the director said, like that explained it, and it did. Everyone on the cadre knew whose student she was. Sergeant Major Elias Vance had run the mountain doctrine on the Blackwall for 30 years before they struck him, struck his name off the instructor wall in the long hall where we put the keepers of the craft, struck his method out of the program of instruction, struck him out of the manuals like he'd never breathed our cold air. He taught men to read ground the way a sailor reads water. To move at night without lights, because lights kill your eyes and a man who needs a light on a mountain is already lost. To trust the shape of a slope over the line on a map, because the map is a man's guess from a warm room and the slope is the mountain telling you the truth to your face. The brass called it cowboy stuff. They wanted everything on the survey, everything on the checklist, everything that would hold up in a review board if it went wrong. Vance wanted his men alive, and he had a different idea about how you keep them that way, and for 30 years he was the most respected and most resented man on the range. Then a winter exercise went wrong on the south face. A team got buried in a slide, and the established route to them was a 6-hour movement that the buried men did not have 6 hours to wait through, and Vance went off the plan. He took 3 volunteers up a line that wasn't on the survey, and he had those men dug out and breathing in under 2 hours, and not one of the buried team died. And they relieved him for it, because he'd broken the scheme of maneuver to do it. Because he'd entered terrain the doctrine for bad. Because if it had gone the other way, if the line he'd read had been wrong, there would have been a board, and the board would have wanted to know why a senior man took soldiers into forbidden ground. And the answer, because I could read it and the checklist couldn't, does not satisfy a board. So they took his name off the wall and they made an example of him, and the lesson every young instructor learned was, follow the plan, and if the plan kills your men, at least the paper will be clean. He died 2 years later in a veterans' hospital in the flat country, a long way from any mountain of the ordinary things that kill old soldiers. The program he'd built was already a ghost by then. I went to the service. I stood at the back. I had argued with that man across 100 after-action reviews for 20 years, me defending the plan, him defending the ground, and I had been so certain I was the reasonable one, the safe one, the one who'd never have a board asking him hard questions, that I did not understand, standing at the back of that small, cold chapel, why my throat had closed up the way it had. Ray's had been his last student. We all knew that. We didn't know much else, because her file was thin in a way that thin files usually mean somebody scrubbed them, and a scrubbed file on a woman who shows up to the hardest mountain course in the inventory at 34 years old does not buy goodwill from men like us. It bought suspicion. A thin file on a man, you assume he's young. A thin file on a woman with gray already coming into her hair at the temples, who moves like she's done this before, who doesn't ask the questions a new candidate asks. That file is thin because someone made it thin, and men who guard a hard gate do not love a mystery walking through it. We figured she'd traded on the old man's name for a slot she hadn't earned. We figured she was here to make some point about Vance, to relitigate an old fight that the institution had settled and wanted to stay settled. And the director figured the kindest thing and the cleanest thing, and let's be honest, the safest thing for everyone's paper, was to let the mountain bury her before she embarrassed herself, and to make sure it happened quietly. I went to bury her myself. I found her on the first morning at the bottom of the pack line where the candidates draw and rig their loads, and the first thing I noticed was that she'd already cinched her load the old way. The way Vance taught. The way nobody teaches anymore. Center of mass high and tight against the spine, the heavy weight riding her skeleton instead of dragging at her shoulders, the whole rig balanced so it moved with her hips instead of fighting them. It is a small thing. It is the kind of small thing that you only know if someone who has carried 100-pound load up 10,000 mountains taught it to you with his hands, and it is the kind of small thing that, on the seventh day, is the difference between a candidate who is broken and a candidate who is fresh. I had seen exactly one other person rig a load like that in my life, and they'd taken his name off the wall. The second thing I noticed was the notebook. A field green logbook, the issue kind but swollen and soft from years of handling, the corners worn round, the cover gone the color of an old saddle. It rode in a buttoned chest pocket where most candidates these days keep a phone they're not allowed to have on the mountain. She caught me looking at it, and she didn't flinch and she didn't explain, and I decided right then that I didn't like her, because a person who doesn't explain themselves to the man holding the gate is a person who thinks the gate is beneath them, and I had been the gate too long to forgive that. "Raise," I said, "you're on the litter detail, you carry. You don't lead a station, you don't run a problem, you haul gear behind the real candidates and you keep up. That's the whole course for you. Understand?" A younger soldier would have argued. A foolish one would have cried or gone red or said something about how that wasn't what the course was supposed to be, as if any of them had ever once understood what the course was supposed to be. She just looked at me with a pair of steady gray eyes, the kind of eyes that have looked at a great many bad things and decided, a long time ago, not to look away from any of them, and she said, "Understood, Senior Chief." And she shouldered the casualty litter and the spare ropes and the heavy medical ruck, 80 pounds, 90, of dead awkward weight on top of her own already heavy load, and she fell in at the back of the column without another word. The candidates loved it. There is a particular cruelty in hard men toward anyone they've decided doesn't belong, and a woman carrying the mule's load behind them was a gift to a class that had been looking for someone to be better than. It is an ugly truth about hard courses that the suffering does not always make men kinder. Sometimes it makes them look for someone below them to stand on, so the water doesn't close over their own heads. By the end of the first day, they'd settled on her. They called her the pack animal. They called her the ghost girl. One of them, a thick-necked staff sergeant named Prout, who'd come in as the presumptive honor man of the class and carried himself like the course was a formality between him and the tab he already believed he'd earned, took to leaving his trash on the trail for her to police up. A torn ration wrapper here, an empty fuel canister there. And the others thought that was the funniest thing they'd seen on a mountain in years. The ghost girl bending under her mule's load to pick up Prout's garbage so the column wouldn't get gigged for it. She never said a word about it. That was the part that started slowly to get under my skin. A complainer you can fail clean. A man who whines about the load you write lacks resilience and you sleep fine. A woman who simply does the impossible work you've piled on her, day after day, without a flicker of self-pity, without a word of protest, without once asking for the thing she has every right to ask for, gives you nothing to write down. And worse than nothing. She starts, against your will, to give you a feeling you don't want, which is the small, cold suspicion that you might be the one who's failing a test here, and the mountain might be watching you the way you think you're watching her. By the fourth day, she was carrying the heaviest load in the class upgrades that broke candidates half her age. We climbed a brutal switchbacked approach to the high training bench that day, 3,000 feet of gain under load. The kind of climb that finds every weakness a man has and pries it open. And at the top, while the candidates went to their knees and sucked the thin air and emptied their canteens with their hands shaking, she set her mule's load down, unhurried, and she pulled out that swollen green notebook and read a few lines and put it away and went to work on the next thing. squaring away the casualty litter so it wouldn't be a tangle when it was needed, re-rigging a candidate's botched anchor before the man even knew it was botched, and doing it in a way that didn't shame him, so quiet about it that he never knew, reading the sky. The sky reading is what I remember most now, looking back. We'd top a ridge and the cadre would call the weather off the meteorology brief we got at 05 each morning, and Ray's would look at the snow itself. Not at her phone, which she didn't have. Not at the brief, which wasn't hers to question. At the snow. At the way it lay in the lee of the rocks, the depth of it and the crust on it. At the way it streamed off the high cornices in a thin smoke, and which way that smoke ran. At the color of the light on the far faces, whether it was the hard, clean blue of stable cold or the flat gray that means the air is changing its mind. And 2 or 3 times in those first days I heard her say a quiet thing to herself, almost under her breath, that the morning brief had not said. Once on the evening of the 4th day she said it where I could hear it. We were dropping off the bench in the last light and she looked up at the western peaks, where the brief had called for the high pressure to hold 3 more days, and she said, low, mostly to herself, "Wind's going to back around tonight. There's a front behind that." And the brief had called for it to hold. And the wind backed around that night, hard, out of the southwest, and a thin high cloud came over the stars by midnight, and I lay in my bag in the cadre tent listening to the wind change, and I told myself it was a guess. A lucky guess. The old man had taught her a few weather sayings, and she'd thrown one out and the mountain had happened to agree. That's what I told myself. I had a great deal invested by then in the proposition that there was nothing to her but the dead man's name and a strong back, and I defended that proposition to myself. The way a man defends a thing he's already starting to suspect is false. On the 5th night I caught Prout's fire team trying to set a hasty rope crossing over the gorge above Tanner Creek, in the dark, against the clock, and they had it wrong. They had it dangerously wrong. They'd run their back tie around a smooth granite boulder that looked solid and was solid, but the rope, once it loaded with a man's weight out over the gorge, was going to roll right off the rounded top of it and drop whoever was on the line into a freezing chute in the black. It was the kind of mistake that ends a man's life and a course in the same second, and I had my whistle halfway to my mouth to call a hard stop and fail the entire team for it, which I would have been right to do. And before I could blow it, Ray's was just there, at Prout's shoulder, not touching his work. She knew better than to touch a candidate's work, knew it would be grounds to fail her, not raising her voice, not making a show of it for the others, just saying low, so quiet that only Prout and I could hear, "Senior Chief, the back tie's going to slip on that boulder. When it loads, it'll roll right over the crown. There's a horn of rock 6 feet to your left that'll hold it. Same effort to move it." She'd addressed it to me, not to Prout, so that it was a report up the chain and not a correction across it. She protected his pride even while she saved his life. And she was right. I walked over and put my hand on the boulder and rocked the imaginary load in my head, and she was exactly right. And Prout knew she was right, and he hated her more for it than he had for anything yet, because a man like Prout can survive being wrong, but he cannot survive being saved by someone he's decided is beneath him. "You want to run my station, ghost girl," he said, and there was real venom in it. "No, staff sergeant," she said, flat, "no edge, no heat. I want everybody to come down off this mountain." And she shouldered her mule's load and went back to the rear of the column. I wrote nothing down. There was nothing to write. She'd reported a hazard up the chain, which is exactly what the doctrine says to do, and she'd done it correctly. And a candidate who can't take a correct report from a soldier on the litter detail without folding is a candidate with a problem the report didn't cause. But that night I lay in my bag in the cadre tent, and the wind was working at the guylines, and I thought about the old man. I thought about 20 years of after-action reviews, me on one side of the table with the plan, him on the other with the ground, and how sure I'd been every single time that I was the one being reasonable. And for the first time in a very long time I was not sure which of us had been right. I was not sure at all. I was a 51-year-old man lying in the dark on a mountain, and the certainty that had organized my whole professional life was coming loose under me like wet snow, and I did not yet know what it was going to bury. She finished the 6th day still on her feet, still under the heaviest load in the class, still policing up Prout's trash, still reading the sky. The final problem began on the 7th morning under a bad sky. I knew it was a bad sky the moment I crawled out of the cadre tent into the dark before dawn. There is a particular quality to the air before the worst weather comes, a softness, a stillness that feels like the mountain holding its breath, and the snow underfoot squeaked at a pitch it doesn't squeak at when the cold is going to stay honest. The stars were already gone in the west, but the meteorology cell stood up at the 05 brief and called for a window. A front was coming, they said, a real one, but it would hold off until midday at the earliest, and the candidates would complete the navigation leg and the casualty evacuation lane on the north face inside that window, and then we'd all walk out ahead of it. Clean. On schedule. The director wanted the course finished. I understood why. He'd already lost 2 days to weather earlier in the cycle. The brass were asking about throughput and graduation numbers the way the brass always do, and he stood up in front of the formation in the gray half-light and told the candidates that this was the test that mattered, the one they'd remember. And he said it the way men say things when they have already decided what they need to be true and are no longer taking evidence on the question. I have done it myself. We all have. It is the most human thing in the world, and it is the thing the mountain punishes most reliably. Reyes was at the back of the formation under her load. She was looking at the sky. I watched her do it. I watched her look at the western peaks where the stars had already drowned and then look down at the snow at her boots and toe at once, testing the crust, and then look at the director and then look at me. And she said nothing. Because she was the ghost's girl and the litter mule, and nobody had asked her, and she had learned across 6 days that offering anything was just another way to get Prout's trash on the trail, another way to be told to keep up and shut up and carry. She had a thing to say about that sky. I am as sure of it now as I am sure of my own name. And she swallowed it, because the men who held the gate had spent a week teaching her that her voice was the one thing they would not carry. I should have asked her. I have turned that morning over more times than I can count, and it always comes back to the same place. A week of my contempt had built a wall between that woman and the only question that mattered, and when the moment came to ask it, the wall I'd built was in the way. We put the candidate teams out across the North Basin on the navigation leg, 4 teams of 4, spread across miles of broken high country, each working its own set of points. The cadre spread out to grade them. And the medevac support bird, an old utility helicopter we called the dust-off, a tired airframe with a pilot and a co-pilot and a flight medic, carrying 2 range control men up to the high bench to rig and seed the casualty evacuation problem, lifted off into that soft gray morning and beat its way up toward the far face above the basin. The front did not hold off. It came over the western peaks a little after 10. And it did not come the way weather usually comes, as something you watch approach and prepare for. It came as a wall. A gray-white wall the height of the sky, and it swallowed the high summits whole, and then the saddles, and then it came down off the heights into the basin, the way water finds its level, pouring, and the temperature did not drop so much as fall off a cliff. 20 degrees gone in minutes. And the wind that had been nothing at all came up out of the nothing to 40 knots, and then past it, and the visibility went from miles to feet between one breath and the next. A whiteout on the black wall is not snow you can watch falling. It is the inside of a cloud, and the cloud has teeth. The ground and the sky become the same blind nothing, with no horizon and no up and no down that your eyes will swear to, and a man 10 feet away from you is a gray rumor, and a man 20 feet away is gone. Sound goes strange in it. You can stand shouting into it and the wind takes your voice and throws it somewhere it can't be used. It is the single most dangerous thing the mountain does, and it had just dropped onto a basin with 16 candidates, a spread-out cadre, and a helicopter somewhere up on the high bench. We want to work the way we're trained, and the training is good, and for the first minutes it held. We started pulling the candidate teams in by radio, calling them onto their pre-briefed rally points, counting heads. The count came up right for the 4 teams in the basin, 16 souls. Then we caught the discrepancy, 14, because 2 of the candidates had been pulled up onto the high bench earlier to assist the range control men with the casualty lane, and they were up top, but they were accounted for alive, gone to ground. The cadre came in. We had our people. And I was just letting the first breath of relief into my chest when range control on the high bench keyed the net, and the flight medic's voice came across the static, thin and torn and wrong, and the words that came out of the handset stopped my heart against my ribs. The dust-off was down. She'd been on the high bench seating the casualty lane when the wall hit, and the pilot, a good pilot, a smart pilot, had made the right call, which was not to try to fly blind off a mountain but to set down where he was and ride it out on the ground. And the wind had taken him on the last few feet. 40 knots gusting past 60, swirling off the face, and an old airframe with no horizon to fly to. And she'd come down hard on the bench, hard enough to fold a skid and crack the airframe and throw her crew, and at least 2 of the men aboard were hurt, and all of them were now in the open, 6,000 feet up an exposed face, in the mouth of a storm that was going to push the temperature into killing cold long before dark. I made them say it again. The numbers: souls aboard, condition, position, 5 men on the bird, pilot, co-pilot, flight medic, 2 range control. Co-pilot with a broken leg, the flight medic said, the lower leg bad. 1 range control man with a head wound and going dull, which is the word that puts ice in an old medic's belly, because going dull 6,000 feet up in a whiteout is a man on a clock you can't see. The rest cold and getting colder. And the 2 candidates who'd been up there on the lane, they were alive, the flight medic said. They'd gone to ground in a snow hole the way we teach, 50 meters off, and they were okay for now. But for now is a phrase that does not survive long in that kind of cold. 7 men on the far face, 5 from the bird, 2 in the snow hole, and no way to them. No bird could fly into that wall. Our dust-off was the bird, and she was wreckage, and even if we'd had another it would have been suicide to put it in that air. No road went up there. The bench is a place you reach on foot or you do not reach it. The far face stood across the basin from us behind a curtain of driving white, and the only path to those 7 freezing men was up the north couloir, on foot, in the whiteout, against the storm. I want to be able to tell you that the cadre rose to it. We tried. God knows we tried. We were, man for man, the most experienced mountain soldiers in the inventory, and we did not panic and we did not freeze. We gathered around the director's map in the lee of the comms shelter with the wind screaming against the fabric, and in the next 10 minutes we built a plan. And it was a good plan, a sound plan, a plan that would survive aboard. A reinforced rescue team up the established route to the bench, fixed lines on the standard pitches, a relay for comms, a methodical movement to contact with the wreck, casualty packaging by the book, and a controlled extraction. It was everything we taught on that mountain. Every step of it was on the survey, in the manual, defensible to anyone who ever asked. And when we ran the time distance on it, every man around that map arrived at the same answer at the same moment, and not one of us wanted to be the one to say it out loud. It was too slow. The established route is long, and it is long because it is safe, and in these conditions the safe route was a march of hours. By the time a team reached the bench by the survey line, the head wound man would be dead, and the broken leg man behind him, and likely some of the others, and likely some of the rescuers too, broken on the slow, exposed traverse in a wind that was still building. The route that would survive the board would not get there in time to save the men it was for. And the route that was fast, the only route that was fast, was the north couloir itself. A steep, snow-choked, avalanche-loaded chute that ran straight up the face to the bench, and that the doctrine, our doctrine, the doctrine I had enforced for 19 years, absolutely forbade us to enter in exactly these conditions, because the couloir had killed before, because men who entered loaded chutes in storms got buried in them. The doctrine was not stupid. The doctrine was written by men who had carried bodies down, and they were not wrong about the couloir. The director stood over the map with his jaw working and no good answer in his mouth. He knew the plan was too slow. He knew the fast way was forbidden for reasons written in blood. He was a good officer caught in the exact place the institution had built to catch men, the place where the clean answer kills your people and the answer that saves them ends your career, and maybe ends them too. And there is no door, and the clock is running, and you can feel each of the 7 men on the far face getting colder while you stand there. And into that silence, the wind howling, the map flapping under the director's gloved hand, Prout and the honor candidates standing white and useless at the edge of the cadre circle, every senior man on the range out of answers. Into that silence stepped the litter mule, with snow caked an inch thick on her shoulders, having come in off the basin under her load like everyone else. "Senior Chief," Reyes said to me because she was not permitted to address the director, and even now, even here she kept to the form of it. "The couloir will go." A couple of the cadre actually scoffed. I heard it. "Not the whole face," she said, even and unhurried, like she was briefing a route in a warm classroom and not standing in a killing wind with 7 men dying across the basin. "The face is loaded and it'll slide and it'll kill anything in it. You're all right about that. The doctrine's right about that. But the couloir has a rib down the climber's right side. A spine of old hard rock that the wind's been scouring bare all winter, every storm, including this one. You can read it right now off the snow streaming off the crest of it. It's the one place up there that isn't smoking. It hasn't got the snow on it to slide, because the wind never lets the snow sit. You can climb the rib while the face comes down beside you, and the face never touches you. The old man mapped that rib 20 years ago. The program struck it out because it isn't on the survey, and it never will be. I can put a small team up that rib to the bench in 90 minutes, and have those men moving down off it before dark." There was a silence, then, that I can still feel in my teeth. "That's the ghost girl talking," Prout said into it loud, because someone had to be the voice of the wall, and he was always going to be the one. "That's cowboy stuff. That's exactly what got the old man relieved. That's exactly the kind of off-the-survey hero nonsense that gets people buried. And now she wants to take us into a loaded couloir in a whiteout on her say-so because some dead man drew her a picture. That's exactly what brought a buried team home alive the day the old man got relieved," Reyes said. And she did not raise her voice to match Prout's, and she did not turn to look at him. And that was the most powerful thing I have ever seen one person do to another. She let his heat hang in the air with nothing to push against, and she kept her eyes on me. "Every man Vance went off the plan to dig out that day is alive right now, Senior Chief. They relieved him for the route. They didn't relieve him for the result, because the result was that nobody died. You knew him. You graded against that rib for 20 years. You knew it was there even while you marked men down for using it. I am not asking you to like him. I'm not asking anyone here to relitigate a board. I am asking you to let me go and get those 7 down off that bench before they freeze. And I'm telling you I can do it because he taught me how, every single foot of it, and it is written down." And she put her hand flat against the button chest pocket, where the swollen green notebook rode over her heart. "I have signed 211 failures in 19 years, and I never lost sleep over one of them, because the mountain did the failing and I only signed. And I stood there in that wind and I looked at that woman with the snow caked on her shoulders and a dead man's notebook over her heart, and I made the only decision in 19 years on the Blackwall that I will have to answer for at the end of my life, because it was mine, not the mountain's, mine. 'Go,' I said. 'I'm coming with you. 2 more volunteers only, light loads, ropes, the medical ruck, oxygen, hot fluids, and we move now.' The director opened his mouth. I knew what was in it. The board, the doctrine, the survey, the careers, all the clean reasons to do the slow thing and write the deaths up properly afterward. and I said before he could spend the words, "Sir, by the standing order I have command of this rescue, and the clock is running and I am taking it up the rib. You can relieve me when we're down." And he closed his mouth. Because somewhere under the brass and the throughput numbers and the fear of the board, he was a mountain man too, and a part of him had been standing at the back of that cold chapel 2 years ago with his throat closed up just like mine. And he knew, that the slow, clean answer was about to kill 7 men, and that the woman in front of him was telling the truth. Prout volunteered. I will give him that for as long as I live. Whatever else the man was, and he was a great deal that I had no use for, when the moment came, and I called for volunteers to go up a forbidden couloir in a whiteout. His hand went up first fast, before he could think better of it, and his face when it went up was the face of a man trying to climb back out of something. And the second volunteer was a quiet corporal named H-Wang, a small, wiry kid from the cadre support element who'd said maybe 10 words all week, and put his hand up now without any expression at all, the way the steadiest ones always do. So it was the 4 of us who went into the white, Ray's lighting, then H-Wang, then Prout, then me on the tail, the oldest man on the rope, and for the first time in 19 years not the one who knew the way. I will not pretend to you that I understood what she did on that mountain. I have read ground all my life. I have forgotten more about snow than most men ever learn, and I could not see what she saw. She moved up that couloir the way a person reads aloud from a book they know by heart, not hesitating, not searching, not testing every step the way the rest of us were testing every step, but moving with her attention out ahead of her boots, reading the mountain 3 moves before she got there. We started up into the chute, and the white closed over us and the basin behind us disappeared as if it had never been. The couloir opened in front of us, when the wind tore the curtain aside for a half-second at a time, as a broad, smooth ramp of new snow, inviting, the easy line, the line every instinct in my body screamed to take because it looked like the gentlest way up. And Ray's put her closed fist up over her shoulder, the freeze sign, and held us. And then she signed us hard right against the rock, and we went single file up the very edge of the chute where a spine of bare scoured stone and old blue water ice ran up the climber's right side, the rib, the bones of the mountain laid bare by a winter of wind. It was harder climbing. It was steeper, and it was rock and ice instead of a snow ramp, and it asked more of our hands and our crampons and our nerve. And twice while we were on it, while we hugged that bare rib and moved, I heard the loaded face out in the white to our left let go. You don't see an avalanche in a whiteout. You hear it. There is a sound like the world tearing a sheet the size of the sky, and then a roar that you feel in your chest more than your ears, and then a wind ahead of it that knocks the breath out of you, and then it is past, and the white closes again, and you are still there because you were on the rib and the snow that would have buried you went down the ramp you wanted to take. Both times. She had read it off the smoking snow before we ever set foot in the chute, read which line the mountain would shed, and which line the mountain would hold, and she had put us on the bones, and the mountain came down beside us twice and never touched us. She broke trail the entire way and never once asked to be spelled. At the 2 narrow chokes where the rib pinched down and the climbing turned vertical, she went up first into the white alone, and fixed a line off the bare rock with her bare thin-gloved hands working fast and sure, and brought the 3 of us up through, one at a time, calm as a woman threading a needle at a kitchen table. And somewhere around the halfway point, gasping, with my old legs starting to go and the kid H-Wang silent and steady ahead of me and Prout climbing like a man being chased by his own past, I understood, fully and finally, what I was looking at. I was not looking at a candidate. I was looking at a master. This woman could have run any station on my course in her sleep, could have taught the cadre that was failing her, and she had spent 7 days carrying garbage up a mountain for a man like Prout, in silence, because I had put her at the back of the column, and she had decided, as a discipline, as a choice she made every single hour, that getting every one of us down alive mattered more than what any of us thought of her or the old man who'd made her. We came up over the lip onto the high bench in 91 minutes. She'd said 90. The 7 were alive. Barely, for 2 of them, but alive. The flight medic had done everything one freezing man can do for the others, had gotten them into the lee of the broken airframe, out of the direct wind, had the head wound man insulated off the snow and talking just, had splinted the co-pilot's leg with wreckage and webbing. The 2 candidates had come over from their snow hole when they heard us, 50 meters of crawl through the white, and now there were 9 of us on that bench against a mountain that had already made up its mind, with one man who couldn't put weight on a leg, one man who couldn't reliably hold up his own head, and the cold coming on harder with every minute and the light, somewhere up above the storm, starting to go. And here is the thing I most want set down, because it is the part the luck people never understand. What she did on that bench in the next 4 hours was the hardest thing I have ever watched a human being do, and she did it without raising her voice one time. She did not give a speech. She did not rally anyone. She took a knee in the lee of the wreck, out of the worst of the wind, and she pulled out the swollen green notebook, and she opened it to a page she clearly knew was there, and she started to build the way down. The issue litter would never take the broken leg man down that rib, too rigid, too wide. It would catch and tip on the bare rock and kill him on the first vertical choke. So she built one from the airframe's own panels and the seat webbing and the spare poles, lashed the old way, a rigid but articulated litter shaped to ride a man feet first down steep rock under control, and she built it calling the steps off to us by number. H-Wang run the spreader bar across the 3rd lash point over-under, then a frapping turn, the old man's method, that's drill 11. And H-Wang, who'd never heard of drill 11, did it from her words with his cold hands, and it came out exactly the way the diagram in the notebook said it would. And she rigged a lowering system off the bare horns of the rib that I would have sworn could not be built with what we had on that bench. A releasable, redirectable 3-to-1 with a backup brake, anchored to the scoured rock. That would let 2 of us lower the loaded litter down the steep ground a controlled foot at a time while the other 2 managed the patient and the ropes below. And she built it off a numbered page, calling it out as she went. Rig the 3-to-1 off the high horn there, back tie it to the second horn for redundancy. The brake goes on the load strand below the redirect. That's drill 19, all of it, exactly 19, just like it's drawn. And Prout, Staff Sergeant Prout, who had left his trash on her trail for a week and called her the pack animal and the ghost's girl, who had stood in the cadre circle 2 hours ago, and called her dead teacher a fraud who got people buried, Staff Sergeant Prout got down on both knees in the snow on that bench and built drill 19 with his hands, fast and careful and exactly right, because she told him to, and because there was nothing in the world he wanted more in that moment than to live. And to bring those frozen men home, and I think, to be a man she would have wanted on the rope. He never said a word about any of it. He just built. And when she checked his rigging, because she checked everything, every knot, every anchor, she trusted the doctrine and trusted no single execution of it. She put one gloved hand on his shoulder for half a second, and that was all, and it was enough. And I watched something in that man's face come loose and reset into a better shape than it had been in for the whole course. We brought them down the bones of the mountain in the dark. It took the rest of the light, and 4 hours past it. 9 men down a forbidden couloir in a whiteout, lowering the broken leg man feet first in the panel litter foot by controlled foot down the bare rib, walking the head wound man between 2 of us with his arms over our shoulders and his boots dragging, the flight medic and the able men down climbing the fixed lines in between, and rays everywhere, at the top managing the lower, then rappelling past to set the next anchor, then back up, reading the rib in the black by the feel of it and the run of the wind, putting us always on the bone and never on the loaded snow. The face slid twice more in the dark beside us, that world-tearing roar out in the white, and both times the snow went down the ramp and we were on the rib and it never touched us, because she had put us where the mountain holds. We lost no one. Let me say that plainly, because it is the whole point, and the luck people would like to lose it in the telling. We took 9 men off that bench: the pilot, the co-pilot with the shattered leg, the flight medic, the head wound range control man who was going dull and is alive today, the second range control man, the 2 candidates from the snow hole, and the 4 of us who went up. And we brought every last one of them down the north couloir in a whiteout in the dark. And not one of them died, and not one of us died. And we walked off the bottom of the chute into the basin a little after midnight. Into the lights and the shouting and the open flaps of the warming tents, hauling the panel litter through the last of the deep snow with the last of our arms. They took the hurt men from us. They were good at that part, the part that's on the survey, the warming and the IVs and the careful hands, and I stood back and let them have it. And I stood in the trampled, lit-up snow with my legs gone entirely to water and watched them carry in the men we'd brought down. And I started in the cheap, ugly, automatic way that emptied-out men do, to feel like a hero. To feel the shape of the story forming, the one where the old senior chief made the hard call and led the rescue up the impossible couloir. And I am ashamed of how good it felt for those few minutes, in the lights, before I was set straight. It was the meteorology officer who set me straight, and he did it without meaning to, and he did it because even then, even after all of it, even with 9 living men being warmed in the tents behind us, there were men who needed it not to be true. I heard him say it to another staff officer, the 2 of them safe and warm and dry in the comms shelter, where they'd ridden out the whole thing. He said they'd gotten lucky. He said the woman had gotten lucky. He said you don't take a team into a loaded couloir in a whiteout and call it skill. You call it a reckless gamble that happened to pay off, and that if it had gone the other way, if her rib had slid, if her read had been wrong, we'd be writing 9 death letters in the morning, and calling her a dangerous fool who'd gotten people killed exactly the way the old man got people killed. And I heard 1 or 2 of the cadre, exhausted and rattled and reaching for the comfortable thing, start to take it up. Because it is so much easier to believe in luck than to believe you have spent a week piling your contempt onto a master and calling her a pack animal. I don't fully know what made me do what I did next. I think it was the old man. I think it was 20 years of arguing with Elias Vance across 100 maps, 20 years of being so certain I was the sensible one, and a cold chapel 2 years ago where my throat had closed and I hadn't understood why. I walked across the lit tent to where Ray's was sitting on the edge of a cot with a wool blanket she hadn't bothered to pull around her shoulders, drinking nothing, looking at nothing, sitting the way people sit when the thing is finally done and the whole cost of it arrives at once and sits down on top of them. And I said, "Ray's, give me the notebook." She looked at me for a long moment. There was no fear in it and no defiance in it, just that steady gray assessment, a person deciding what a thing was for. Then she unbuttoned the chest pocket and put the swollen green logbook into my hands. I opened it in front of the whole tent, and I read from it out loud, and I made the meteorology officer and the cadre and Prout and the director and everyone in that warm light listen. It was the old man's hand. I knew that crabbed, hard-slanting hand from 20 years of red ink on my own exercise critiques. I would have known it anywhere on earth. Page after page after page, drill after numbered drill, dated, diagrammed in his own careful hand. And there, where I turned to it with my reading carrying flat across the tent, was the north couloir, mapped and sketched in detail that no survey on file held, the loaded face and the scoured rib on the climber's right drawn exactly as I had just climbed it, with a note in the margin in his hand. The wind scours this rib clean every storm. It holds when the face slides. It is the only safe line up this couloir. They will not put it on the survey, so teach it by hand. And drill 19, the lowering system, drawn out step for step, anchor by anchor, exactly as Prout had built it on the bench 2 hours ago and 4 miles up. And drill 11, the litter lash. And the weather sign, the one she'd said on the 4th evening. When the high cloud comes in off the southwest and the cornice smoke backs around, the front is a day closer than the brief, written 10 years before any brief that morning was wrong. Every single thing she had done on that mountain, every foot of that climb, every knot on that bench, every reed of the snow and the wind and the sky, was on a numbered page in the hand of the man they had struck out of the program. She had not gambled 1 inch of it. She had not gotten lucky one time. She had executed a doctrine, line by line, that worked, and she had been the only living person on the Blackwall who could. And then I turned to the back of the book, because that is where a soldier keeps the things that matter most, behind the work where you don't show them. And there was a single page there that was not a drill. It was a duty record, the kind they scrub out of thin files, the kind that makes a file thin in the first place, and it had her true name and her true grade, which were both higher than anything she'd let us believe, and a call sign, lodestone. And under the call sign, a list of operations that I am not going to write down here, because most of them are still closed and will be closed long after I'm gone. And a citation summary, in dry official language, for a recovery she had led, alone, off a mountain on the other side of the world in conditions like the ones we just climbed through. A recovery of a team that every authority had already written off as lost, brought home alive by one pathfinder who would not accept the survey's verdict that they were dead. The old man's last student was not a charity case. She was a decorated special reconnaissance pathfinder, one of the most accomplished mountain soldiers alive, and she had come home and walked into the hardest mountain course in the inventory under a scrubbed file and a false low profile and a mule's load. And she had let us pile a week of our contempt onto her in silence, because the only thing she had come to take from us was the chance to prove that the old man had been right, that the doctrine they struck off the wall was real, that a man does not have to choose between a clean board and a living team, that the ground can be read, and the reading can be taught, and the teaching can bring 9 frozen men down a couloir in the dark. The director had come up behind me while I read, and he read that back page over my shoulder, and he went very still. He had known Vance too. He had been at the chapel. He looked at her for a long, long moment, sitting on the edge of the cot with the blanket she hadn't bothered to use, and then he came to the position of attention in the middle of that warming tent. A thing I had never once in my career seen a course director do for a candidate, and he held it rigid, and when he spoke his voice came out rough and broke on the name. Sergeant Major Elias Vance, he said, and the struck name landed in that tent like a bell, the name we were not supposed to say, the name they had taken off the wall and out of the manuals. His name goes back on the instructor wall. His doctrine goes back in the program of instruction, and it goes back, he said, looking at the woman on the cot, under the name of the soldier who proved it tonight. And then the hardest officer I have ever served under turned to a woman he had personally ordered me to fail and wash out quietly so there wouldn't be a scene, and he saluted her. I came to attention beside him, and I rendered honors too. I had buried 211 candidates on the Blackwall and slept fine on everyone, and I stood in that tent a little after 1 in the morning, soaked through and shaking, and 51 years old, and I held a salute to the one I had been ordered to bury quietest of all. And around the two of us the cadre came up off the cots and the crates one by one and came to attention, the exhausted men who'd reached for the comfortable lie about luck a minute before, and they let the lie go, and they saluted. And Prout, with his hands still raw and scraped from building drill 19 on that bench, Prout was on his feet first before any of them, and his salute was the sharpest in the tent, and there were tracks down through the dirt on his face that he did not bother to hide, and that no man in that tent would ever have called weakness. She stood. She returned the salute, but she did not return it to us, and I need that understood because it is the truest thing I know about her, and it is the reason I am writing any of this down at all. She turned with the whole tent standing at attention to her, away from us, toward the tent flap, toward the dark beyond it, toward the mountain where the old man's rib ran up into the white we just come down out of, and she held the salute out there, to the line nobody could see. To the man who'd drawn it 10 years and 20 years before, who'd carried it home from his own buried team and been struck off the wall for it, who taught it by hand to one last student because they wouldn't let him teach it any other way. She held her salute to him in the dark, while the rest of us held ours to her. It was his senior chief, was all she said to me when she finally brought her hand down. Quiet, worn to nothing. No triumph in it anywhere. There is never any triumph in the real ones, only the weight. All of it was his. I just carried it home. They put Sergeant Major Elias Vance's name back on the instructor wall that spring. I went to the ceremony. I stood at the back where I had stood at his chapel, where an old gatekeeper who'd guarded the wrong gate for 19 years belongs. They uncovered the restored name in the long hall among the keepers of the doctrine, and his old students came. The buried team he'd dug out a lifetime ago, gray men now, and they stood very straight. And under his restored name, where the hall lists the soldiers who carry the doctrine forward, they had cut one new line into the stone. I read it every time I walk that hall now, and I do not walk it any other way than slowly. I make my candidates read it, the new ones, the hard young ones who think the cold is a thing you can outwant, and that the survey is the whole truth, and that a quiet soldier on the litter detail is beneath their notice. They read it, and they don't understand it yet. They think it's just a name and a call sign cut into a wall. The way I once thought the old man was just a cowboy who'd gotten lucky, and his last student was just the ghost girl with a strong back and a mule's load. They'll understand it the night the mountain turns real on them. We all do, the ones who are lucky enough to live through the lesson. It says raise lodestone. She carried it home.